you probably know somebody or met somebody with Alzheimer's, and if you have, you know that it takes a significant toll on loved ones of that person. Alzheimer's is a disease that causes memory loss, both long-term and short-term, and for the caregivers and loved ones of these people, it's incredibly stressful as these patients will often repeat the same question over and over again. So whenever they're given an answer, they simply forget the answer shortly afterwards. So to combat this, there are these Alzheimer's clocks which have been developed, which are similar to an iPad that's set up next to a patient. And what these do is they display the time, the date, and occasionally the weather. Those are simple things that many people would ask frequently, and these are things that Alzheimer's patients will ask multiple times. The design of the purpose of these clocks is to give this information to prevent them from asking these questions over and over. The only problem is that oftentimes Alzheimer's patients will repeat questions that a simple clock like this cannot answer. My goal with my improvement is in an Alzheimer's clock, by the way. It's just very straightforward. These things are very expensive. This one costs $60. This simple clock. So I wanted to do two things with my new Alzheimer's clock. I wanted it to be more customizable to allow for user input, and I wanted it to be more inexpensive. There are a lot of lower class families that can't afford these expensive Alzheimer's clocks or don't think that the benefit they provide is worth the $60 cost. So what I have to do is make it more inexpensive or cost-effective to have one of these. So I use a Raspberry Pi, which is a small computer. I was using the Raspberry Pi 2, which is $25, but my program will probably run on the Raspberry Pi 1 for only $10. So with the $10 Raspberry Pi and keyboard and mouse for only $5 each, that's $20 and a free program developers online. You're at a much cheaper cost than a much more inexpensive cost than other Alzheimer's clocks. The way mine is more interactive is that it allows for you, the caregivers and loved ones of people with Alzheimer's, to input their own note, to type directly into the keyboard and display anything they want. So if someone's asking, say, my grandmother is with Alzheimer's, say my grandmother goes out to the store for a little while and wants to leave a note for her, he can simply type in the keyboard and go to the store, and that way she was not repeatedly asked where he went to So I'm very interested in coding, and I wanted to run the world of coding and helping my grandmother in this project. So I had a couple of problems with the code originally. Some of the struggles I had was inputting images into my code. I'd never actually taken anything from outside of processing, so I needed to learn how to input my own images. It turned out to be pretty straightforward, but it took me a while to figure it out. And then once I had these images, what I did is when my program drew its kind of nice, neat background, it did it 60 times a second, because that's the refresh rate of my program. So what I ended up doing is I changed it so that with only refresh every 10 seconds, which is when the images change, to greatly reduce the processing time necessary. This actually enables it to use on the Raspberry Pi 1, which is the much cheaper version, or the much more expensive version of the clock. So I ended up testing this with my grandmother. I left it with her for a day, and I was actually very surprised at how many times it was used. I figured that my grandfather, who's not very tech savvy, will use it a couple of times initially after being told how to use it, and we used it 14 times over the course of 24 hours. And after when I came back the next day, both he and the home help reported a significant drop in the number of repeated questions asked over and over. So the reason that this is important to me is because as someone whose family is affected with Alzheimer's, how stressful it is to deal with these repeated questions over and over. And I can't even imagine from a little time tomorrow, once I pack my clock up, I will be leaving it there in my grandparents' house on a much more permanent basis in the hopes that over the summer it will alleviate some of the stress of dealing with these questions. So my clock needs a lot of work. It really only has a few features right now, but that's the beauty of the fact that this is a program, is I can continuously iterate it and keep updating it throughout the summer. So I hope to add the ability to play music from it, because many people with Alzheimer's experience lucid moments when they recognize music or recognize family members. So for people with early stage Alzheimer's, this can be very beneficial. However, people with late stage Alzheimer's can often have negative reactions to familiar music or familiar family members. So the program also has the ability to completely remove these features so that you can use time to set the background music to avoid these kind of issues. Additionally, I wanted to allow for a medication alert if any of you have some Alzheimer's or medication involved, especially with the elderly. And so hopefully this will take the place of an alarm and will provide a warning. Whenever they need to take medication. So I wanted to talk about everything that STEM has done for me this year. STEM has really helped me learn how to set goals for myself. The use of this project over the course of the year has been really beneficial because for me, a lot of projects are very short term. I'm really about setting my own personal goals over the course of the year and keeping myself responsible for them. And thank you very much. So I originally wanted to create a sort of, I noticed, I heard about a game that was supposed to delay the onset of Alzheimer's. And so I originally wanted to try and create one of these games, but given the short term of a year and actually only the last trimester of code, it seemed a little infeasible. That was when my mentor, Mr. Stanford, suggested switching to an Alzheimer's clock, which was a lot easier to code short term, which is what initially gave me the idea. And that's why I have a few features in it. Thank you.
How's it going? My name is Devin Jones. This is my brother. I grew up being small and having energy generated from water. My design statement was a microhydropower system that collected rainwater and held it in a reservoir, suspended on a large structure, and basically utilized the force of gravity to accelerate water downward and in turn come out of a valve, turning a motor on a turbine to generate electricity. For my project, I saw a lot of small-scale solar panels and a lot of wind energy that was small scale, and I really wanted to make a hydropower system that I could make on a small scale and utilize it. I started off just making design, writing my ideas on a graphic notebook and just writing. I started with this one, which was essentially going to be on top of another structure and have a taller and wider reservoir on the top, with the part leading down, which is called the backstop, a tube to basically pump the reservoir down and get into the turbine. The backstop would actually be a lot wider than my original idea, and the turbine was going to be extended off the backstop and down the backstop. Over time, I generated a lot more ideas, and my whole idea of what the system would look like changed completely from September to actually around February, January. And it became a lot more simpler. I was thinking about one bucket, making taller, so I got a large head, increasing efficiency, and overall just making the project more simpler, less material use, while still achieving a large efficiency rate. How I proceeded after making my design was a physical prototype that getting a piece of plywood about 6 feet tall and making a base for it and going and putting it on top where I could keep my reservoir. And right in the reservoir, there's a nozzle right there with tubing would attach and allow the water to go through. From here, there were a lot of problems with that because the water being really heavy and only having a small hot to sit on could cause the tip over to break off. So I had to adjust with that. And my original turbine was actually a lot smaller, and I used ping pong balls, hot glued to a acrylic base. And as simple and rudimentary as it sounds, it actually worked perfectly with my design and helps a lot in actually testing it and experimenting with it. These are some pictures over here. I really like the idea of a turbine that uses ping pong balls as its rotors because it's something you can recycle and it's plastic. Other than ping pong balls, not very useful, and I found useful and it worked really well. After making my prototype, I moved on to testing it, and I didn't need a lot of variables. All I did was fill the bucket up with proceeding from 2 liters, 2.5 liters, all the way to 4.5 liters, and I would time how long it took the water to go through a full cycle. And with that, I also had a multimeter attached to the back of the motor as it was running to see how much energy it was produced. And I came up with some interesting results. I found that when there's more water in the bucket, meaning that there's more water stacked on itself, that more energy in the instant moment as the turbine rotated, it actually generated more energy, meaning that the water's coming out at a faster velocity and increasing the rate of the turbine. This was actually a great find, so I could change the whole design of my reservoir and how I would actually bring the water from the reservoir to the turbine to hopefully increase efficiency. And it was just something I had to see. I started with 2 liters and it took about a minute or so to actually go through a full cycle. And it only generated about 0.8 volts of energy per cycle as it went through. And as I went down to about 5 liters, it took a lot longer, about 161 seconds to go through a full cycle of that. And on top of that, the instant velocity of the water and how much voltage I was getting out of it, I was getting about 0.06 more than it was previously. And the differences, and only in my prototype, the reservoir was only about 10 liters of a bucket, and in my final state, it is 17 gallons. So I can hold a lot more water, and that's a lot more potential energy. Along with changing my reservoir, I actually changed the design and look of my turbines to make it more efficient and interesting. I attached it on just a small piece of acrylic. It still had the acrylic base, still had the big long walls, just changing the design up, made it so that I had a little bit more area to have area to see it looking like surface. I also, in my last one, I have a pretty short shaft attaching from the turbine to the motor, and in my newest one, I made the shaft a lot longer to hopefully have it more stabilized and work better and rotate a lot with faster velocity. And going back to my original one, it was only about 6 feet tall, and that only generated about 0.86 like tops of voltage. And with my new one, it's about 8 feet tall, suspended, and theoretically speaking, if I were to hook the motor and put a light bulb on it, it could run. The light bulb would be pretty dim, but it would run for about a whole day. And if I wanted to be the brightest it could, then probably the light bulb would run for about an hour or so. But I had a lot of fun with this project, especially the final one, because everything I had seen before and everything that I had kind of come up with, I was able to look at, evaluate, and analyze, and just redo and update and upgrade, create a better product and with a better result. From my beginning in my initial design statement, I didn't stray far from that, and I kind of stuck to what I really wanted to accomplish, which was a small-scale hydropower system that was able to generate just a decent amount of energy for what it is, and we were running take any energy and we don't want to create some energy. But some here and there problems I still have for efficiency, and specifically for efficiency, on areas like right here, I would have a lot of friction, and the viscosity inside the tube, viscosity meaning basically the friction of liquids as they pass through objects, like certain things like that would decrease the efficiency and make it not be able to create as much power as along that power generator. And also accessibility, it's pretty big as you can see over there, but it takes up a lot of room. You can't really move it around easily. It's not like a global source of energy, but more supposed to be implemented at just one place, but hopefully one day it can be updated and be able to move around. And also stability. It's got a large 17-gallon water reservoir on top of it, and it could use a little bit more stability, which is what I'm looking for as I continue to work on it. Over the whole project, I've learned a lot, a ton about renewable energy, a ton about hydropower, and specifically small-scale hydropower. Normally, hydropower is done on running water sources like rivers or creeks where the water is constantly going through the turbine and constantly generating energy. Other than rain gutter turbines and things that were a lot smaller and didn't generate that much energy for what it was, I didn't see anything that used rainwater. And I really like the idea of using rainwater because in areas such as the Philippines or India, there's monsoon seasons and large mass amounts of water where they can't use wind power, they can't use solar power, and they need an energy source. So, these are some terms I learned along the way: viscosity, making a friction of liquids inside tubing. The penstock. In this case, the penstock would be the tube, just that it runs down the center right here, and draft tube being the valve at the bottom. Their version of control gate would be the valves are allowed to turn on and off, which at any right here, this valve I'm able to turn on and off by let the water accumulate and build up, and then over time it turns to the desired amount. I just turn the valve, let the water go through. Flow and head. Height of head is about how high the reservoir is from the turbine, and that does contribute a lot to the efficiency of it. And the flow is just how fast the water is going. And then a runner is the first bit of water that comes out of your tube, the first bit that hits the turbine and kind of basically sets the stage for the rest of the water. Makes any sense. But I had a lot of fun with this project. I learned a lot, and I'm really excited to continue working on it and make it better. In all of this, I have to thank my teacher, Ms. Donnelly, for helping me along the way, as well as Ms. Bracken. It was a great mentor and taught me a lot. The most challenging part was probably figuring out whether I wanted to base my project around designing a turbine that was more efficient or just making a ping-pong ball with a base. Because there's definitely more efficient turbines out there, and they can for sure they have better energy output. But for this project, I kind of wanted to make something that was more of the system, and then just make a one-shift turbine that worked perfectly, but could still use it. Other questions? Thank you.
Hi guys, my name is Malia Butler, and my capstone presentation, my capstone project this year, I decided to do a solar powered van. There we go. So, where I got this idea from is I was always fascinated of how people use solar energy to power the appliances within their house, and so I wanted to work with that more. And my first idea was using solar energy to power washing machines and dryers, and I thought that wasn't realistic for the time that I had and the budget that I had. So I got to the idea of phone chargers, so turbocharger, but as I did more research on that, I saw that it's been done a million times before, and I sort of didn't want to spend my whole year on something that's been done so many times before, so that's how I got to the idea of fan. So my desired outcome for the project is a portable fan that runs completely on solar energy. So starting this project, I didn't want to start by familiarizing myself with electricity and solar energy. So I started with a multimeter lab where I set up a multimeter and designed a circuit around it and played with different resistors and batteries and got different voltages with that. And then I did a solar cell lab where I connected a solar cell to a DC motor. And for those who don't know, the DC motor is what you can connect to the fan blades on a fan, and it gives it the circular motion that you need for a fan. And then this is the third project that I did. I took a fan out of an old computer, a projector generator thing, and I connected it to a battery pack. And this picture over here that you see is a cooling joint space. So starting my final project, starting the building process of my final project, I started with sketches and did pros and cons list for the sketches. So this top one, I thought the best part about the top one is that the solar panel would always have access to the sun, and so it would always have a good angle to the sun. But the bad part was that it was sort of bulky, and then it just wasn't as portable as I wanted it to be. And then for this one on the bottom right here, I thought that it was I thought that was a very good design, but ultimately the DC motor that I had to end up using was too big for this design, so I couldn't end up doing it. So starting my prototype, this is the 3D printed fan that I ended up using on this side right here. And these are all of the materials that I ordered. This gray thing right here, I don't know if you can see it right there. But that is the original DC motor that I plan to use. And what under it is the solar panel, and I ordered all this stuff, and I was really excited, and then none of it ended up working. So I had to sort of figure some things out. So me and my mentor, Mr. Kojal, were sort of working in the makerspace one day, and Ms. Rothman had a DC motor in the back that she had used, and I don't know how long. It looks really old, and it had dust on it and stuff. But she had pulled it out of the back, and this is what it looks like. And we were testing it with the whole solar panel that I had been using for 2 weeks with no success. And we're like, let's just try it with this DC motor. And this DC motor ended up working. So this is the DC motor that I used for my end project. And my first original design that I wanted for my prototype was a box fan. So I did a four-sided box, and there was going to be a shelf across the middle. And the motor was going to sit in the middle of the shelf, and the fan was going to be in the middle. And when I did the peer review session, they basically told me they didn't like it. And so I had to sort of adjust the design according to the feedback that I got. So according to the feedback that I got, this is what the final design looks like. And so the fan sits on a platform, and the solar panel connects to it, and you can take it off. And so you can sort of put the solar panel wherever you want it to be, and it has a lot of portability that way. So the test that I conducted for my experiment is I wrapped a thermometer in a piece of cloth, and I saturated it in water, and then I put it in front of the fan for 10 minutes, and I marked the temperature for that 10 minutes, and these are the results. I varied the start temperature, and so the start temperature is always much higher, but it always drops dramatically and then sort of levels off. So for all three, it does that. It levels off. And so I concluded that the cooling effect was efficient. And the limitation that I had was the motor that I had to use and the time that I had I only had the time for 3 trials, so that wasn't enough for me to generalize the results. So reflection, so as I reflect on the past year of doing the STEM capstone, it has really helped me be a better planner, because in the past years, I didn't really plan anything. If I had an idea, I just do it. And working with Ms. Darling and Mr. Kojo this year, they sort of helped me plan out my ideas, and that way I have a better rate of success, rather than just executing my ideas and having to fail much more times. I would have a much higher rate of success the first time. And so, thank you for that. So acknowledgements, I mentioned Mr. Kojo, the STEM capstone teacher, Ms. Darling, and the engineering teacher, Ms. Rathman. Thank you to all of that. Any questions? Yes. RD, so the whole third trimester is basically RDM. So all the descriptive statistics and inference data, like all of that you learn in RDM is the entire third trimester. So if you pay attention in RDM and I'm laughing, not being serious. If you did well at RDM and learned your stuff, the third trimester is going to be easy. If you didn't, I don't know. Any other questions? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Thomas Wong, and today I'll be talking about the farm science. We can take a stroll in your garden and see plants that look like this. If you're a garden enthusiast, you know something is wrong. In fact, the plants are sick. And in fact, the plants shown in the pictures are infected by parasitic plant fungi, which are very common pathogens for plants. Many of these one of the parasitic plant fungi affect the plant's leaves, and which makes it immediately visible, and they come in a variety of forms. Some of them will blush plant's leaves, as the one on the left, and whereas some others will cause white blisters on plant's leaves on the right, as the one on the right. There are now well commercially available fungicides in the market that help treat plant fungal diseases, but they share 3 common drawbacks. First of all, many of them contain copper and sulfur, which are toxic chemical elements that pose a threat to soil microorganisms, which are part of the natural ecosystem. Secondly, some of the organic fungicides contain chemicals that are highly soluble in the water, which make so that they may run off into local water system, contaminate the water, and thereby spreading the pollution. And finally, many of these fungicides, the environmental impacts associated with some of these fungicides are not well investigated, so there will always be a risk associated with the use of these fungicides. And inspired by these drawbacks, I began my research to explore the fungicidal capability of 3 options of alternative fungicides to figure out whether they are most effective as fungi and environment friendly. So the 3 alternative fungicide options that I chose, as you can see on the slide, are Tabasco hot sauce, Tide detergent, and Windex. You may wonder why I chose these compounds instead of others, other than the fact that they're all very common household products, and here are the reasons why. Tabasco hot sauce contains the chemical capsaicin, which is the chemical that gives hot chili the spicy taste. And there have been studies showing that capsaicin has some sort of antibacterial effect, which means that it kills bacteria. And I'm interested in whether the same result extends to fungi. Windex contains a prominent amount of ammonia, which is also toxic to yeast during certain life stages. And at the same time, ammonia is also an integral ingredient of many plant fertilizers, and as it furnishes nitrogen to a plant and poses no threat to the plant's health. And finally, Tide detergent contains borate ions and living alcohol species, which is a group of chemical compounds that consist of a long hydrocarbon chain attached to a benzene ring. Both of these compounds are toxic to yeast, as they either inhibit key enzymes in yeast metabolic pathways, or they destroy yeast cell membrane. Well, boron iron is a mineral that we utilize by plants. Boron alpha species pose minimal threat to plant cells, and then can be degraded under natural conditions. So both of them are very safe. At the beginning of my research, I set forth the hypothesis, which you can see in the white box on the slide. Since real parasitic plant fungi are really hard to maintain under laboratory conditions, I decided to use baker's yeast as my model organism, which is also a species of unicellular fungus. There are at least two variables that I can consider in my design experiment, which are the type of the treatment and the level of the treatment. And to take into account the both of these variables, I apply these three alternative fungicide options at different concentrations to different cultures of baker's yeast, and I measure the number of yeast colony that grow from each of these cultures. Here's a photo showing what yeast colonies look like. And this is what my experiments look like. So essentially, I applied each alternative fungicide at three different concentration levels at 10%, 1%, and 1% to saturate yeast cultures. And since this is a controlled experiment, as well as the treatment group and the control group. So essentially, because I have one person, and the control group receives no treatment that does not have any effects on the growth of the yeast. So by having this set up, I can investigate the effect of fungicides on the growth of yeast alone while holding other conditions the same. And this is what I found in my experiment. So each of the data points from the graph represents the difference in the treatment control pair. So for example, in the graph on the left here, the leftmost data point, which you can see here, means that when applying the Tabasco hostas to yeast culture at 10% treatment level, the number of yeast colonies that I observed in the treatment group is about 40 less than the number of yeast colonies that I observed in the control group. And that, in other words, means that the treatment of Tabasco hostas at 10% reduced the number of yeast colony by about 40. And you may wonder if that's a significant reduction. Well, if you look at the 95% confidence interval that I draw here, you can see that it captures 0, which is the red line in the middle. And what this means is that statistically, 95% of the time, the difference of between the treatment and control will fall in a range defined by the upper whisker of the confidence interval and the lower whisker, which extends to the negative infinity. And this, statistically speaking, is not significantly less than 0. And since, as you can see, all of the confidence intervals here shown on these two graphics capture 0. So we can conclude that both Tabasco hostas and Windex lack a significant adverse effect on yeast, at least under the conditions tested in my experiments. Well, the scenario is a little different for tide, as you can see here. For the 1% level, 10% level treatment and the 1% level treatment, the confidence interval do not capture 0. And that means that 95% of the time, the difference is going to fall below 0. That means that that's a significant reduction statistically. And the rate of reduction is about 94 to 95% in the case of the 10% treatment, and it's about 70% of 1% treatment. And therefore, we can draw a conclusion that Tabasco hostas and Windex do not significantly adversely affect the yeast, whereas tide does, at least at 10% and 1% concentrations. And here are some pictures I take in my experiments. Just as every scientific study is limited in certain ways, there are also First of all, because due to logistic constraints, I can only make 4 replicates for each treatment scenario, which gives me limited data for statistical analysis. And because this is a small sample, it deprecates the accuracy of the statistical tests, which are the confidence intervals that you just saw on the last slides, and which may increase the chance of me making a mistake when judging the effect of alternative fungicides. And secondly, I used Baker's yeast as my model organism in my study, which may or may not be representative of certain parasitic fungi species. And therefore, there are also limitations to the applicability of my research to true parasitic fungi under natural conditions. And therefore, I recommend field work involving applying tide to real parasitic fungi under natural conditions to be done before establishing it as a practically effective fungicide. And finally, here are some reflections about my research. It definitely helped that this project improved my lab skills because all the experiments I did in my project are about pipetting at very high accuracy levels. Also teaches me how different it was to work in a lab versus to read about science in a book. And finally, the project was a great exercise of applying scientific method and design experiments to solve real-life problems, which I think is very, very interesting and very helpful. And that concludes my presentation. Does anyone have any questions about what I just presented? No?
Okay, all right.
Hi, I'm Sarah Ricky,
And I'm Catherine Thomas.
and we did our STEM project on establishing a population of oysters on the list. So we decided to look into oysters because in Chesapeake Bay, there's been a huge population decline, and this is a problem because oysters filter the water, and they also provide habitat for other creatures, so it affects the whole ecosystem and not just the oysters. So our first project idea was to grow diploid and triploid oysters, and triplet oysters have 3 chromosomes, so they grow faster and are more disease resistant. However, there's already a study done on these, and they said that they would not be safe to introduce into the bay. So then we wanted to look at diseases such as MSX and dermal. However, oysters are already becoming more naturally resistant due to natural selection, and so we didn't do that. Then we thought about looking at the plastic microbeads. However, before doing this, we had to set up a tank and just get the oysters, which led to our hypothesis that by monitoring and regulating the variables in the tank, the population of the oysters would naturally stabilize.
Our biggest priority was to just get the oyster tank set up. So our first step was to find a suitable tank, which we luckily found in North Hall. The second step was to order supplies. This included circulators, substrate, which is the material on the bottom of the tank, and testing equipment. So on the left here is a salinity refractometer. It measures the levels of salt in the water, and on the right is a nitrite test kit, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The third step was to meet the oysters' habitat requirements. Oysters have certain requirements that need to be met in order to ensure their survival. So these include salinity having to be between 14 and 21 parts per thousand, and substrate having to be on the bottom of the tank. Once the tank was ready, we purchased a dozen Chesapeake Bay oysters from a seafood market in DC. They were put on ice during the bolus, and 11 out of the 12 oysters purchased were introduced to the tank. One of the oysters we did not introduce because it had other organisms growing on its shell, and we thought they would interfere with our test results. Another thing we have to keep in mind is that oysters are marine animals. They excrete ammonia as a nitrogenous waste. Ammonia is very toxic. This is not an issue in the bay because the bay is such a large body of water that when ammonia is excreted, it is in such a low concentration compared to the body of water. But when you put 11 oysters in a small tank, the concentrations can build up quite quickly. So in order to prevent this from happening, we introduced nitrifying bacteria to the tank. We introduced two types. The first type converted ammonia into nitrite. However, nitrite is still a toxic compound, so the second type converts nitrite into nitrate, which is a less toxic compound. The bacteria was introduced at the same time as the oysters, and then the oysters were fed using rehydrated phytoplankton. The last step that we had to do was to keep track of the tank and the variables. The variables included salinity, dissolved oxygen, pH, nitrate, nitrite, temperature, and a couple more. We performed tests, and the levels and observations were reported daily. Another variable that we had to keep in mind was the amount of oysters that were alive. How you can tell if an oyster is alive is by checking for life signs. So, if the oyster's shell is open and it closes when you touch it, then it is alive. If the oyster shell is tightly shut, then it's also alive. But if the oyster shell is open and it does not close with the stimuli, then it is most likely dead or dying. This is a video of the generalized test. You can see the opening of the shell right there and watch it as it closes. Right. If an oyster was found to be dead, it had to be removed immediately. Unfortunately, two of our oysters, that's Pearl and that's Marina, they both died, and Marina we didn't catch early on, and she decayed in her shell, but we were luckily able to remove her from the tank safely. Pearl we caught early on, so she was very easy to remove. To organize our data, we gathered all the measurements of each of the variables and put them in tables and graphed them on time plots. To prove that our hypothesis was successful, we had to show whether the variables had stabilized or not. And when something is stable, it's not changing. So we decided to calculate and graph the rates of change in each of the variables. Up here is the two graphs of salinity. So the top graph is the time plot, and the bottom graph is the rate of change graph. So the rate of change graph shows you that it stabilized by around February 14th, and the top graph shows that it stabilized to 17 parts per thousand. And these are some of the other variables that we graphed. These are their time plots. This is dissolved oxygen, nitrate, nitrite, and temperature over time.
So the hypothesis was supported because over time, all of the variables, the rate of change reached zero, and the ammonia levels were consistently at zero. So looking at trends for salinity and nitrate, they both stabilized by February 14th. And then for nitrite, temperature, and dissolved oxygen, they stabilized by the 14th, and then they fluctuated again and stabilized finally by the 25th. So this led us to believe that from February 6th, when they were introduced, to the 14th, the oysters stabilized, but from February 6th to the 25th, that's when the bacterial population finally stabilized, because that's when the nitrite stabilized, and that's a byproduct of the bacteria. And the ammonia levels were consistently at zero, so that meant that the tank was stable.
Throughout this year, we learned that this is a trial and error process. Up here, you can see this is our timeline with each of our project ideas. On the bottom, with the green lines, they represent each of our ideas. On the top of the red lines, these represent each of the roadblocks that we hit. But even with all these roadblocks, we were able to find and complete a successful and intriguing project. There are three important skills that the capstone has helped us with. First is problem solving. We learned and used this skill when navigating our way around roadblocks. The second is knowing when you need help. The capstone involves a lot of independent work, and it is sometimes easy to get stuck and only see your project in one way because that's the only way you can see it. So it's helpful to know when you need to reach out and gain a different perspective to keep your project going. The third and final one is presenting and reaching out. When you start the capstone project, you're looking into a topic that you know little to nothing about, and it is a part of the capstone is reaching out to experts in the field in the surrounding community and getting their insight on your project and seeing what projects they're doing and seeing what's current in your field of study. Also, throughout the year, we practice presenting on a topic that we know a lot about, and that really helps us develop our presentation skills. Overall, the STEM capstone has taught us so many valuable lessons and skills that prepare us for future research, college, and beyond. And I'd like to take a moment to thank Ms. Darling, Ms. Mother, and Professor Tara Scully at George Washington University for all their help. Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is George Lewis, and the project I did in 2016-2017 caption year was the portable. So my project was to build a portable wind turbine that's capable of charging both a case or an iPhone. And initially, what you see here is a design that I tried to build, but I realized that I wouldn't be able to do so due to project restraints. The origins of the idea, this idea came from me wanting to be interested in environmental science and environmental engineering. So what I wanted to do is build a project that's capable of helping the environment positively. One of the things I initially wanted to do was build something that had no solar panels, but I strayed away from that to expand in STEM class and decided to build a wind turbine that's capable of charging a lot of the research that I initially focused on was large-scale wind turbine, which you see in America a lot, is large wind turbine, like I saw on the previous slide. And initially I focused on the components of the wind turbine, how they work, how they function, and also on energy prediction charts like the one you see here. And what that tells me is what diameter and speed will, how much energy will be generated based on those constraints and specifications. Also, doing the research, I realized that the benefits of a smaller design is that it would be portable and lighter, also innovative, and it's not something you see every day, and also it allows for clean and renewable energy use, which is something that I want to focus on, because the great thing about wind energy is that it's always available and can always be harnessed. So my hypothesis in the design statement was how can I build a small-scale wind turbine that's capable of charging a phone or a case with a design that's portable and has blades like the Japanese and previous. So the first thing I did was build a PVC wind turbine, which I see in the back and around. With this, I printed 3D blades, and I tested each blade twice for a total of 10 minutes. And at each minute increment, I looked at how much voltage was being produced over the time period. The first blade I tested was 5.5 inches diameter, and had 4 blades total, and that blade, the average was 5.2 amps per minute. And from looking at this blade, I realized I really want to build a blade that's bigger and that's larger, so that way more energy can be produced. The next blade I tested was 3.75 inches in radius, and this blade produced an average of 23.02 in the first test and 20.4 in the second test. So this blade was much skinnier and had a longer radius. I felt that it was more successful, but I also wanted to have a larger surface area. That's why in the third test I decided to print that 3D blade you see here. And this was the most successful by far. This produced an average of 29.73 amps per minute. And I felt that this made me realize that I wanted to design that's most light, but at the same time as a large surface area, so that way a lot of energy can be produced. The second thing I did was construct a circuit, and I did this using various techniques, one of them being soldering. And soldering, for those of you who don't know, is a technique that uses a hot iron to put 2 pieces of metal together. And this was by far the most difficult thing I had to do in my project because it involves a lot of precision and detail. So I focused on this for around 2 or 3 weeks, and it took a really long time. It took a lot of trial and error to get it to work once. wanted to work with like stuff using CAD is something here. It's like 5 inches in radius, and it has 4 blades, and it's 2.4 inches in width. And this combines a lot of different designs I saw that I tested in the beginning because I have a large surface area, and at the same time, it's very light, and it can be moved around in various different places. So I use that design at the testing using the circuit and that design I saw on the previous slide. That came with these 2 charts, and I was only able to test for 20 minutes because unfortunately it stopped working after 20 minutes. But I was able to, regardless, still able to test. And what I did is for the first test, I tested using a multimeter just to see how much energy was being produced at each minute. And then I also tested charging and recharging the case, and I was successful in doing that. And as you can see here, the maximum I was generating was 0.04 volts, and the minimum was 0.01. And you'll see that there's a little bit of fluctuation, and that's mainly because the problem is that the circuit is not as strong as it could have been. So that means that when the blade's turning, the energy generated can fluctuate from various. In conclusion, I ran a 95% confidence test to see how significant my data was, and I came up with the fact that my data is significant, meaning that if someone were to use this, use the design I created, then it would be able to recharge it for the case, and this method my design was successful. Every question? I felt that the gaps in a lot of research skills and engineering skills. Research skills being what good research is and how to conduct good research, and separating what the good sources are from the bad, and also engineering skills such as soldering and such as using CAD, because those are skills that you can use when you have a real job and when you or when you go to college. The next steps on our project would definitely be to remake the circuit, because at this time it's very iffy and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I definitely want to remake that as soon as I have the time, and I want to test using other people and actually see what people in the design if they want to go hiking or go for a run. And then I'll build headgear that you can actually use to cover your head, so that way you can like go running or for a hike, you can actually see turbine moves. Lastly, I want to say thanks to Dr. B, who was my mentor, Mr. Crucial, who was my mentor, Ms. Darker, who was the STEM and capstone teacher, Ms. Radford, who developed my CAD design in the 2016-2017 capstone class. Thank you. Anybody have any questions about my project?
Yes. Why don't you use solar panels? Yeah.
Excuse me?
Why don't you use solar panels?
Well, I didn't choose solar panels because I felt that design, the solar panels are already used a lot in our, in the United States, in America too, so I felt that using wind energy would be more unique to my project. Any other questions? Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm here Ross, if you don't know me. Okay. How many of y'all play sports? You can raise your hand. Okay, how many of y'all play sports outside? Now keep your hand up if you actually wear sunscreen when you play your sport. Great. So, according to Stanford's Cancer Institute, over 50% of athletes do not wear sunscreen when they're out on the field, which shows that we need to protect our athletes from the harmful UV rays that are outside. How many of you feel like when you're outside you get drained easily from the sun? Okay. That's from the sun's UV electromagnetic waves, which are beaming down on you and raise your body temperature. And when your body feels that happening, it kind of feels like, oh, I need to make sure that I'm regulating my temperature. So it uses its own energy to regulate its temperature, and then that's why you feel kind of drained. So this is just a kind of sketch graph of what is happening when the sun hits your skin. So right here you see the UVB rays, and there's two. So there's UVB rays that hit right here, and that goes only to the surface of your skin, and that's the kind of automatic results of when the sun hits your skin, and that causes aging and wrinkling in your skin. But UVA is more of a serious problem, and it's like more of a serious problem, and it can cause up to like really serious problems such as skin cancer. Which leads us to Eric Olson, which was a study at Stanford, and he was 20 years old when he was running on the track team, and he was on his team for 5 or 6 years, running shirtless every day for 2 to 3 hours, and he conducted research, and he found out that he had melanoma. We need to do something as a community to prevent this issue from happening with our own students. So this is my design statement, and I hope that this design statement can actually affect our community and be able to prevent something like this happening to somebody in our community. So this is my design statement, and it says to help prevent the possibility of burning, sunburning, skin cancer, and other effects to the sun. An outdoor pavilion will be designed and built in a central area between the fields on campus. They use trust calculations, hydropower, and solar power to cool players off. So these are some of the materials and methods that I used when I did my design. I feel like the X-Acto knife and cutting board were the most useful in my working with my design, because I didn't know how I would be able to cut through the materials that I was going to use, that I'll show you in my board in the back. But in order to cut them, I had to use a cutting board and then place my design on top of that, along with wax paper, and then cut over with the material in the X-Acto knife. So these are the methods that I use in 3 stages, starting with the truss design. So I had to consider uncontrollable factors and controllable factors. Uncontrollable factors would be something like sun, wind, and snow, the weight of snow, the force of the wind, and the deterioration that the sun can be on your materials. And then controllable factors were how heavy the materials that I was going to use on the roof. And code regulations, which are things that the state or government introduces into making what's the word? Structure. And those are things that you have to follow in order for your structure to be legally okay to build. So some of you will be like, what's a truss? So these are 2 examples of trusses. The one on the left is something that you probably see more regularly than the one on the right. The left is under a roof. That's probably a barn from what it looks like. It can also be used for houses, churches, other examples like that. And then on the right, it's under a bridge. Sometimes it's over a bridge as well, or encasing like the sides of a bridge. So to go back to the 2 other sides of my methods, the next thing I had to do was a sun study, which is kind of using geometry, so you can use math in real life, I figured out. So the next thing I had to do for this part of the study was the angle of elevation, which was figuring out where the sun would be in order to figure out the maximum coverage of the sun. And I used the months of March to November because those are the months that everybody's out in those fields the most. And I figured if those are the hottest months, they need coverage from the sun because that's when it's the strongest. So in order to do that, I had to use the median of means that I found from my data, which I'll explain later. And then the next part of my methods was model building, starting from the bottom to the top, starting with the base and support beams, truss model, which I just talked about in the group. So in order to put this in perspective, I figured that I need to figure out what the real life materials would be for my design. So I decided on concrete foundation, cedar wood for the support beams, and dimensional asphalt roof shingles for the roof. So these are my initial sketches for my first model, which I'll show you at my board in the back, but these are the first models. These are called elevations, which are just one point of view from your whole model, and then on the left, no, the right, but the right was a rough sketch of where I wanted to place my model. So these are the first steps in model building, which are starting from the right. You can see high and the edge of the base. I had to cut a hole that was very precise in order to fit the support beams that you see here, and then the trusses would be placed on these support beams right here. So this was the first finished basic model. I wanted to be able to know what I was doing before I put like my actual studies and data into my finished model. So these are the elevations compared to the real life model. And these are just more pictures. And then drafting, I did this drafting after I created my first model in order to put it into perspective with base field architecture board, which you can see right there. So this is the sun study that I did for my actual model. As you can see, this is the senior lot, and this is where I want to place the pavilion because this is a central area between this field and these 4 fields in order for everybody to have an equal walking distance, or basically equal walking distance to the pavilion. So these are the sun study data that I collected, starting with March all the way down to November. I chose a central day, like April 6th, because most people are out on the 6th. It's not close to a holiday or anything like that. So I started with the time 2:40 because most people start at 3, but some people get out there early. So I started at 2:40 and then at 5:40 in order to cover the whole time people would be out. So these last squares are just the averages of the first and the third. And I averaged those for each month and put them on this table. And this right here is just a sketch of what I did for the median of these means. So I took all of these and found the middle number. And these are the angles that I found for my truss. The top one being 84, the side one being 31, and the other one being 65. Starting with the sun being down on the short side first. So I started creating my model, and I started with the base, making sure that there was enough trimming on the edges in order to get my support beams in there. Then I worked towards the truss models, which were very complicated because I had to figure out where they would go in order to make sure that they didn't break down. Because if a roof falls on something, that can be an issue. So here were the trusses that I did, and going on to the next slide, you can see the almost finished product. I hadn't put the roof on yet. It was very important that I make sure that all the trusses were almost identical if possible, because something as precise as getting these angles down correctly was very important to make sure that the truss wouldn't fail. So in conclusion, I think the truss design could probably be the most faulty aspect because when you're creating the truss, it has to be tested. In order to be tested, you need the real life solution, and it takes a lot of time, money, and resources that aren't available necessarily. So then I think that the materials used, those would only be an issue if there was an error in production or bad reviews given on what materials were used. And I think that the theoretical approach could be very useful to this campus and can help people in the end. So what did I learn? I think one thing that I learned was project management, being able to do something in enough time, because these trusses ended up taking way longer than I thought they would be. I thought it would take me about a week and a half, and then it ended up taking me 2 weeks and a half. So I had to change around my schedule, make sure everything was finished by the date it needed to be finished now. And I think I'll be able to use these time management, project management skills in college. Being able to do that will help me figure out when I need to get things in, turn things in, make sure I'm going to the right place. And I would like to thank my family, my teachers, and my colleagues for supporting me during this process. Any questions? Any questions? No? Okay, cool.
Hello, I'm Chomsky. I'm an idea. In our STEM project is shark race. We use necromen chemicals for shark mitigation and intragoat protection.
So before we begin, can anyone tell me how many humans were killed by sharks last year? 10. The actual number is 4. Zach, could you tell me how many sharks were killed by humans last year? The actual number is somewhere between 100 and 250 million sharks. That's about 11,500 sharks every single hour. And most of these sharks are caught as illegal line catch, and their fins are used to support the shark fin sink trade. And when this happens, the sharks are caught, their fins are cut off while they're still alive, and they're thrown back in the water, where they'll sink to the bottom, jam, or be eaten by other sharks. This is very detrimental to the entire ocean ecosystem, because sharks are what we call keystone species, which means the local food web rely on. And since there are over 400 different species of sharks, they are basically part of every single ocean ecosystem. So if they're taken out, the entire ocean ecosystem collapses. Additionally, they can also hurt countries' economies because many countries rely on shark tourism. And a single shark can bring in over $2 million throughout its lifetime. However, its fins are only worth about $180.
Since Jaws became a worldwide phenomenon, the media has portrayed sharks as negative man-eating creatures. Despite this being completely false, the portrayal took off, and now many people either do not care about sharks or are afraid of them and want them dead. The consequences of this are lots of fishing, legally and illegally. Unless the public realizes the true value of sharks, the killing will continue.
So our goal is to improve the public image of sharks, and we hope to do so by decreasing the negative interactions between sharks and humans. And so by doing so, that will allow the image of sharks to not be tainted by shark attacks, which will hopefully want people to support shark conservation and want to learn more about sharks. So the way that we want to do that is by creating a surf leash which repels sharks. There are 2 parts to the project. One of them is using a chemical called a shark necromone, which is an oil extracted from decomposing shark tissue, which repels sharks. And now we need to incorporate that into a surf leash. And the reason why we chose a surf leash is because surfers make up over 50% of shark attack victims. So if we can eliminate surfers as attack victims, you already take out a big proportion of all attack victims.
To create the gel, we used a procedure recommended by Dr. Scarselli, who is the University of Maryland bioengineering professor. We mixed our necromone chemical with phosphate buffered solid, a phytoinitiated carterature, and PEG dicrylate. It took us multiple attempts to discover a concentration that effectively allowed the necromone chemical to diffuse out of the gel while still being able to transform from a liquid to a solid. After mixing, everything was centrifuged. We used UV light to warm the mixture until it formed a gel, and this usually took about 8 minutes. Here's a video of us creating the gel. As you can see, as the UV light shines on this part of the mixture, it solidifies and becomes a solid.
So the second part of our project is making the actual surf leash. And so there are a few goals we had for our device. Firstly, it had to have a low profile so that it didn't inhibit surfer performance. Secondly, it had to be a cheap material which worked well in our budget, which did not corrode, but there were multiple uses in salt water, so we chose PVC. And lastly, it also had to be submerged in the water while the surfer is surfing. So we placed it close to the ankle strap, because usually while surfers are wading, they're full feet in the water. That's also what most surfers attack. So the necromone can dissolve that into the water while the surfer is waiting for a wave.
Because we do not have any saltwater available, we used the Potomac River. Despite it being freshwater, it worked well because the flow of the river mimicked the ocean currents. We put each gel in a mesh bag, which is very breathable, and tossed it into the middle of the river. We individually marked each gel so that we could tell which one was which. We measured the mass of the gel before and after testing to discover the change in mass. Each one was in the water for about 18 hours for ample time for diffusion.
So we gathered two types of results, quantitative and qualitative. For the quantitative results, we saw that 7 out of the 9 samples had lost mass, an average of about 6 grams. And for the qualitative, we observed that the macromone had dissolved out of the gel. We were able to tell this because the macromone has a yellowish color. And so after the 18 hours, those gels, the 7 out of those 9 gels, didn't have the yellow color anymore. And so when we analyzed our data, we thought that the two outliers could be explained by the way that the two gels were stuck under a rock or a log. And so there was a lot of water flow. And the overall change in mass for the quantitative data is statistically significant, which is good because that shows that the macromone effect that dissolved out of the gel actually did dissolve. And that's backed up by the qualitative observations, which again shows that the macromone did dissolve out of the gel, which means that it's efficient. We would obviously like more tests, however, with our time constraints, this still proves very promising.
Next, we'd like to combine the gel and each aspect of our product to test the product's effectiveness as a whole. We'd like to test it in real-world situations that would real ocean with real sharks. And we'd like to make the next one with gel faster to parallel the time that a surfer is actually surfing. And we'd like to test the performance of the leash and see if we could withstand the beating that waves give it. The STEMtalks helped us to teach us the reality of research projects. It's not like you just think of something one day and you go out and do it. It takes months of planning and organizing, and then months after you test it to analyze your work. It helped us apply the knowledge we had about scientific theory and apply it to our project, and it gave us the flexibility we needed because we always had to go to the University of Maryland to create the gel, and it was great because the STEM class was very flexible. We'd like to thank the following groups of people, especially Dr. Scarcelli gave us the entire bioengineering department. Without generously offering us the lab space, resources, and feedback, this project would have never been possible. We'd also like to thank Ms. Gunner for being our in-school mentor, and Ms. Starling for teaching class and providing valuable feedback and support. Thank you. That was in the reflection. That's what we'd like to do next.
Yeah, we didn't have enough time. We didn't have enough time to go to the beach, but that's hopefully some of our next steps.
What did you teach practice about
Yeah, they weren't actually in plastic when they were in the river. They were in a mesh bag. We tied on strings or rope and set it dissolved in the water.
Hi, I'm Anna, and I came up with a way to integrate solar energy with existing bionic prosthetics. So, did you guys know that there are 1,285,000 people living with limb loss in the United States? Well, I didn't know this either when I walked into Walter Reed Military Hospital this summer. What I did end up learning is that there are a lot of difficulties amputees struggle with on a daily basis that we know nothing about. One of their unseen struggles is that the prosthetic feels very heavy to them. One of the reasons for this is that the prosthetics have very large batteries that are used to power all the motions that the hand does. So from this, my inspiration arose. So I first started searching, how can I decrease the weight of the prosthetic? Well, and then I came across one of these facts, that the battery life of the prosthetic lasts about 8 to 10 hours. So I wanted to figure out a way to make this greater. I wanted to figure out a way to improve the quality of life of amputees so that they can forget about having to charge their prosthetic every night or having to bring spare batteries in order to make their hand last a little longer. So here are the goals of my project. My first and foremost goal was to increase the battery life of the prosthetic. I needed to do this because then it would allow amputees to go on a camping trip or to be able to expand prosthetics to third world countries where electricity is not as accessible. And then I also needed the hand to move. It needed to open and close because if not, then there's no reason for a prosthetic. And then, this is the most important one, I needed to improve the quality of life of the amputees because at the end of the day, we're trying to make their life as easy as it can be. So I began my project by researching and finding a 3D online file of a prosthetic hand. It was called the Limitless Arm, which was created by UCF Armory. I used this as the foundation of my project, which I then remodeled and added different components in order to reach my specific goals. And you will see these modifications throughout the presentation. And another reason why this file was the best one was because you can reshare it back to the community. And I thought this was the most important because if I want to improve the life of the amputees, I want to be able to share my ideas with the rest. So my first step was to construct the hand. My first task with this was to 3D print all the portions of the hand. As you can see, right here, these are all the parts that I needed to print out of the hand with a 3D printer in the makerspace. So this was a pretty easy task until I got to the flexible joints. So the flexible joints is what is going right here in between each finger. At first I tried printing them with the MakerBot, but the flexible material had issues because it wasn't printing out as it should. So then I found a 3D Hub, which is pretty much a company that prints out any 3D file you send them. So once I got those, I put the hand together, and my next step was to thread it. The reason why I threaded it is because you need to create tension in order to open and close the hand. So if you think of those puppets that have strings, you pull that puppet string, and it makes the hand go one way or another. So that's pretty much the idea to it. Okay, so then I integrated the electrical component. So this took up the bulk of my time for the project. So at first I had to create the circuit schematic. So you see this right over here. So I had to be able to figure out which connections I needed to make between which component. So as you can see here, I added this component right here. It's called the Sunny Buddy. So what it basically does is that it transforms the solar output of the solar panels right here, and it creates it into energy that the battery can then use. Right here is the Arduino. This is pretty much the brain of the circuit. So it's going to transform the signal that the muscle sensor sends, and it makes it something that the motor can then read and understand. So once I finished that schematic, I actually started to solder. And for those of you who don't know, soldering is pretty much melting metal and then connecting two wires together. So this is going to allow for the for the current to go through. And at first, my first try for this, it didn't work. I accidentally connected two things that ended up short-circuiting my system. So the current is going through. So I had a little freak out moment, but then I reached out to an individual that works with this systems, and he helped me, and I learned how to first simplify the circuit and then also figure out where my issue was. So the second time was the charm, and it ended up working out. And then my last step was uploading the edited Arduino code. So this code is pretty much programming. If I touch this button right here, it's going to tell the motor to move. So then I put it all together. So what I had to do is I connected the battery to their respective spaces, and then I also connected the solar cells. And then after this, I had to thread, right here you can see, I had to thread the cords from the hand to the motor. This took me a little bit while because I needed to make the spacing perfect so that the strings were taut, so that when the motor does move, it does create tension, which will then close the hand. And then I attached all the electrical boxes to this board for rapid prototyping so that I could start testing. So my testing consisted of me figuring out how the battery life of the muscle sensor would change with and without the solar cells. So my control group is right over here. It's the one without the solar cells. And then my solar cell group is right over here. It has the solar cells. So here's a little sneak peek of like how my testing worked. So basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to discharge the muscle sensor over an hour. So I'm trying to make the muscle sensor work continuously over an hour by sending a signal to the motor, which is what you saw the hand moved. The reason why I have that green little thing moving around is that I needed to figure out a way to automate my testing because I don't want to sit there for an hour touching the muscle sensor like every couple of seconds. So I tested for an hour for each control group and I did 5 trials for each. So in total I did 5 for the control group and 5 for the solar cell group. So my results here show that for the control group, right here, which is the one without solar cells, it discharged at a steady rate of 0.02 volts. So in other words, as I was using the muscle sensor, voltage is decreased in the battery. So here it shows that it will go down, and 5 data points were enough to then extrapolate the data. And then right here you can see that by adding solar cells, the voltage stayed at 4.13 volts. So what does all this mean? So without solar cells, the battery would discharge in 68 hours. But when I did add solar cells, it remained at 4.13 volts, which means that if it's in continuous sunlight, the battery won't discharge and you can use it as long as you want. So my conclusions. First of all, I was able to increase the battery life. So my proof of concept worked, that if I add solar cells, I can make the prosthetic last as long as I want to. And then the hand didn't move, as you can see in the video. And lastly, the amputee's life was improved by being able to do this. So my reflection. During the STEM capstone, there was a lot of ups and downs for sure, but I was able to learn how to solder, which would be a great skill for college and just any other engineering classes. I was able to learn how to manage my time because we had to assign ourselves homework every single week during the second trimester in order to finish our project. I also had to learn how to create problem solving. Like you could see with that little bug that went around, that was something that I just thought of in order for me to not have to sit there. And also I learned how to network. I learned how to email other teachers or people that are really that are just professionals in their field. And I also learned how to do research that is reliable and would help me in the future. So I want to thank Ms. Starling, Mr. Kojal, Ms. Rothman, and also my parents for everything during this project. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? In my prototype, it's my solar cells are just basically on a board, but if I were to continue, I would 3D print out the board, and those would be like attached on like the top of the, and since they're flexible and thin, it would be able to mold to that shape.
Do you plan on like continuing this project when you graduate or like making this like an actual product or how does it?
Well, I'm planning to study biomedical engineering, so hopefully I can do do this project in college as well. So. That's a great question. I don't know, but but the part of the hand that you see is plastic and it's rubber, so it has no, none of the cables going to it, so that shouldn't be a problem. It's just how much can the plastic withstand the water. But that's a good thing to test it. Anything else? All right, thank you.